Deputy Mayor J. Phillip Thompson was appointed Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policy Initiatives this February. He had previously served as Associate Professor of Planning and Urban Studies at MIT, Deputy General Manager of the New York Housing Authority, and Director of the Mayor's Office of Housing Coordination under former Mayor David Dinkins. He has expertise in urban politics and coalition building, applied knowledge of interagency cooperation and policy. This particular deputy mayor has a vast and vital portfolio. He oversees New York's signature Pre-K for All program. My first job when I got back from the Peace Corps was running a preschool program in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I thought they said prep school, and I expected to be playing basketball with a bunch of 15 and 16-year-olds, and instead I became the surrogate father of 300 3 to 5-year-olds. So I'm very dedicated to preschool education. Mayor Thompson also ensures the continued success of the Community Schools and Young Man's Initiative and Thrive New York City, the nation's most comprehensive approach to mental health. And additionally, the deputy mayor has been charged with expanding the city's investment in minority and women-owned businesses and leading the mayor's comprehensive strategy to encourage greater voter participation and improve the way the city carries out election. Democracy in New York City. And so having said that and read the excellent description that I was presented with, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to start with what I think are some positive opportunities. I'm not depressed. You know, I've gone to a lot of conferences lately, and people who care about social equity and so forth, they're kind of like down. Oh my God, you know, Trump is president. Oh my God, the Republicans can control Congress on things terrible. I'm not depressed. And I think one of the first things we have to do is sort of look at the big picture, look at the horizon. And actually, I've never been more optimistic about our future and our potential. And I'm old enough to remember segregation in America. I've seen a lot of forward progress against what people thought were inevitable odds. No one I knew, when my parents were involved in civil rights, no one thought segregation could end. That was just impossible. America can't change. And then it happened. I remember my dad worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. I remember when they integrated trains. It used to be you got to Washington, D.C. if you were going south, and then everybody had to get out of the train and get in different cars. And I remember the first time we sat in the dining car and it was integrated, and black folks they came with the lemons sliced up and the hot water in a bowl, and black folks made lemonade. They didn't know you were supposed to clean your hands with that. My mother was just appalled at the time, but folks had never had that experience before. I remember how new that was, at the time. So I say all this in context that Trump doesn't bother me. We've seen Lester Maddox, we've been there before. What I think are some positive opportunities, number one, climate change. Of course, the fact that, we've burned up, part of the atmosphere with fossil fuels is horrible. But on the flip side of that, there are almost 1 million buildings in New York City that need to be retrofitted to use less fossil fuel for energy efficiency, almost 1 million. And the opportunity of doing that is an opportunity for a whole generation of green carpenters, electricians, architects, engineers. It's going to eventually be a whole explosion in sorts of growth in jobs, and we can fight to make those good jobs paid for by our savings and energy expenditures, over time. That's very doable. It's something, we're working on right now. And It will mean a lot of institutions have to change, but it's a great opportunity to change institutions. You know, the building trades could actually be a lot bigger, but they're going to have to be a lot more diverse than they ever have been. They're going to have women in them. They're going to have people of color in them. But it can be a thriving industry here in New York with good jobs for lots and lots of people. I have a sort of a vision I like to throw around called the $70,000 a year janitor. And one of the biggest problems in energy efficiency in commercial buildings, and why a lot of building owners haven't retrofitted their buildings, is once you install these new systems, you have to maintain them. And if you have a cogenerator, it's called a cogen, making electricity and hot air and cool air in the building, and solar in the roof, and sensors on the windows to move air from the sunny side to the shady side in the wintertime, and vice versa in the summertime. Those systems run via computer. But right now, Johnson Controls, Siemens, General Electric, everybody has a different system for how to do that. It's as if you were to plug in a computer and every building you went in had a different kind of plug. It's not standardized. So it's very hard to find people who know how to repair a system, because you need to be trained in the very particular system that might be in a building, and there just aren't a lot of people available to do that. So folks don't adapt it. But as a big city, we can actually move in the direction of setting standards for what those software protocols could be and should be. And that will enable people to be trained at scale, because they'll be trained to a common set of standards. Then it'll be easier to get someone to come repair your building. And people who know how to maintain those kinds of systems are worth a lot of money. A big building can easily save $250,000, $500,000, or more a year in an energy retrofitted building. It can pay for $70,000 a year janitor. So I kind of put that out there as something that can happen. Remaking Manhattan's landscape. The biggest threat in Manhattan is probably going to be heat due to climate change, and we're also facing rising ocean waters. Even though there's not a lot of discussion about it, climate change is proceeding whether Trump or Congress talks about it or not. It's happening. Oceans are rising. It's happening. And heat is a problem in a concrete jungle like Manhattan. So you have two choices. You can build walls to keep the water out as oceans rise. I personally think a better idea is to invite the water in and start rethinking our landscape, Manhattan as Venice, Manhattan with canals going through it to cool off the city. But that's the kind of thing that we have to grapple with now. And it creates all kinds of opportunities for rethinking infrastructure, new kinds of jobs, designing and creating this new infrastructure for a whole lot of people. Going from fossil fuels to renewables creates the opportunity for locally owned microgrids. That's something the state of New York is pushing hard right now. They just committed $1 billion for the Bronx, another $1.5 billion for Brooklyn to promote microgrids and reduce the necessity for new natural gas lines, et cetera. A microgrid offers the opportunity for community ownership and community wealth generation. I don't know if you've been to a hotel where they have a little sign in the bathroom. If you want to be green, don't put your towel on the floor, hang it up, and use it again, and then you'll save, energy and doing the washing, and you can be green. Now, the hotel saves money in laundry, and they don't give you a rebate. So it's a moneymaker for them, and you get to be green. They get to make more money, you get to be green. It's kind of similar with microgrids. There are a lot of young entrepreneurs who come from places like MIT, where I was for the last 18 years, and they come into a community and say, oh, we can help you be green, plus we'll save you some money, and we'll give you a contract, and this is how much you'll pay for energy, and it'll be green, or it'll be a microgrid. but, they'll keep, whatever the money they can make in the process, and you really don't know how much that is. And then what they do is they say, if you really want to be green, do your laundry at 7 at night or 7 in the morning. Don't do it at 2 in the afternoon when energy prices are peaked because all the buildings are open and air conditioning and heat and so on. Do your laundry 7 at night, 7 a.m., and then government won't have to open a dirty coal plant because we're over our peak, we're at peak demand and we need the extra energy. And we don't have to do that, and that's green, right? Do your laundry at night, it's green. They will then run the generators, the local renewable, the cogens or whatever at 2 in the afternoon, sell energy to the grid and pocket the money. Right? It's the same thing that happens in the hotel. You get to be green, they get the money. However, if you have a community-owned grid, you can organize the community and say, guess what? We're all together going to do our laundry at 7 at night and 7 a.m. We're going to run the generator at 2 in the afternoon. And here's how much money we're going to make. And guess what? You've just created a community-owned foundation in the middle of a community, the Bronx, in the middle of central Brooklyn. And we as a community are going to decide what to do with the money. That is something that introduces democracy, engagement. It has material incentives and wealth and money that people can control. That's a different direction we can go with microgrids and energy if we're aware, right? And if we design the programs that way. Healthy cities is another area. Cities and the government is gradually learning that prevention of sickness is cheaper than taking care of people after they get sick. You would think that's self-evident, but it's really not. Our whole healthcare system has been based on post-sickness care. Hospitals had, if there was a ditch in front of a hospital and every day someone stepped in the ditch and broke their leg, hospitals had no incentive to fill up the hole in the ditch because they got paid by taking care of people whose legs were broken and not by preventing people from breaking their legs. And it's a very expensive way to operate healthcare. That's what we've been doing, fee for service. Now, with the Affordable Care Act, the whole idea is to incentivize hospitals and health systems to fill up the ditch. And Medicaid was first out of the box in ACA reform, to reform the payment systems to hospitals to reward them for prevention. They don't know how to do that. Hospital administrators are not trained on how to fill up ditches and keep people from getting sick. Hospitals are like restaurants. A prosperous hospital is one that has its beds full, right? A prosperous restaurant has all the tables full. And just like a restaurant, restaurants want to serve you what's cheapest for them to provide, all right? And the biggest margin, so they have specials. And, specials on lobsters, specials on steak, because they got a good deal on lobsters, a good deal on steak. Seldom do you see specials on pasta, right? It's just not a big money maker. Well, in a hospital, the big things that give you a big payback are coronary surgery, heart surgeries, very expensive things. Medicaid, Medicare reimburses really well for those kinds of things. So hospitals literally want to do more surgeries and more MRIs. In fact, some hospices in New York were like giving people 2 and 3 MRIs, in the hospice. It reimburses well. Right? And that's how the system's been structured. But ACA is beginning to push health systems in the direction of prevention. That offers huge opportunities for equity. Huge opportunities. Because the things that make people sick are poverty, high unemployment, bad housing, stress related to not knowing what your kids are up to. Are they dealing drugs? Are they going to get shot? Are they really, are they studying at night? Those stressors are what causes massive disparities in health outcomes in poor communities and communities of color. Addressing those problems for real actually saves money. It is actually a fiscally conservative, but practically, from an equity standpoint, radical approach to addressing these longstanding problems, but this time we can actually measure its outcomes. We can actually show it's cheaper to provide housing for chronically homeless, mentally ill people because it saves Medicare, Medicaid bills. Hawaii showed 40% plus savings on Medicaid when they prescribe housing for chronically homeless people as opposed to not providing that. That's after the cost of housing is taken into account. So Hawaii's actually been building housing with Medicaid dollars. And so that's a new direction. And there are new directions, things that can be done right now that even fiscal conservatives, once they see the numbers, tend to go along with because it saves money. Healthy buildings is another example. Before I came here, I worked on a project in the Bronx. We got Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx to give us the data on their repeat asthma cases, which are very expensive. Turns out, vast majority of these cases came from 50 buildings in the Bronx. 50 buildings. So treating those buildings, retrofitting them to reduce asthma, getting rid of mold and rodents and so forth, reduce costs. But we said if we're going to tear up the walls, let's do an energy retrofit at the same time. And the savings in energy can actually pay for the cost of the asthma retrofit. And the system as a whole benefits greatly because we'll really bring down those repeat asthma cases. So we have opportunities to create things like that right now in a range of areas. And that's part of ACA reform that's not going away because even Republicans support that. Digital transformation. We're at the beginning of the digital revolution in manufacturing and in systems, not at the end of it. Smartphones and laptops are not the end. They're the beginning. And AI, robotics, it's going to change everything. We will, in the future, not have stoplights for traffic. All cars will be smart cars. They'll be managed by an artificial intelligence manager in the cloud. That's how traffic will move. It'll be different. Our homes will be smart. When we leave work, the heat will come on or the air conditioning will come on. You know, the house will start getting ready for our arrival as soon as we leave work. You know, things are going to change fundamentally. Drugs, right now, I just left MIT. Massive amount of money going into DNA research. Why? Drugs in the future will be designed for your DNA, for your individual body. You'll go to a pharmacist, it won't just be a bunch of drugs, generics on the shelf. The pharmacist will actually design a prescription for your DNA. And pharmacists will have to know computational biology, right? Which is something we need to start teaching in preschool, in juniors, high school, and high school. It's going to change fundamentally. The way technology is moving, it's fundamental change. These create opportunities as well as challenges. Because these industries aren't established yet, and government and the public we can set the rules and design how these new industries emerge. One of the challenges is the most productive forms of development, R&D in the digital world is open source collaboration. That's where Linux came from. That runs Apple, that runs IBM, that runs these big systems now. It's an open source product. It's free. It was created through thousands of people collaborating online. And there's never been a force as productive or powerful as hundreds and thousands of people collaborating online to solve a problem. No corporation has ever been able to compete with that once that's organized. That's the whole open source revolution in technology. You can't do that with traditional laws on privacy and patents and private ownership. It's structured to do the opposite. So we have to create whole new ways of thinking about how to organize the economy that actually fits this immense growth in revolution, really, in collaboration. We have to create that, and it means breaking apart our traditional notions of private ownership and privacy, and that's a challenge for us, but it's a good thing, in my opinion. And it's a good time to rethink that. We also need to rethink compensation. When you have hundreds and thousands of people collaborating to solve a problem, interactively, just talking back and forth, exchanging ideas, sharing ideas. How do you pay somebody? How do you say, well, your idea is worth $1.37 and your contribution is worth 58 cents? And it's impossible. You have to create new ways of thinking about compensation, a more social wage kind of orientation. That's something we need radical accountants to be really working out now. We need to just rethink how we organize the economy, but it offers opportunities from the equity standpoint. And Terry was saying earlier, what is the role of government in AI? I recently spoke to the UAW and Ford Motor Company in Detroit. And I was said to Ford, they're all consumed with AI, but they're looking at it very narrowly, like how do you steer a car so it doesn't hit people and run into trees and things like that. That's their obsession. But I asked them, have you thought about the whole infrastructure for traffic management from AI? And they were like, no, we haven't thought about that. Well, I said, well, you ought to, because if Google owns the infrastructure that all cars are going to have to use because there won't be traffic lights, then you're going to be a subsidiary of Google. You better fight to make sure that infrastructure is public, or else you're done. You're done, because everybody's going to need that traffic manager. It would be if we don't have public ownership of the AI infrastructure, it will be like allowing a private company to own roads and bridges throughout our cities. What would that do? That's not too smart. It kills innovation. It kills development across a range of areas. It makes one super duper monopoly. That's not what we want. And Ford was like, whoa, hadn't thought about that. But it's very important that city managers and mayors and you all think about who owns the infrastructure for AI. How do we develop it in such a way that it promotes prosperity for all, not just creates giant monopolies? I could go on with examples. But there are opportunities here. Last opportunity I want to mention. 80% of cities in America, medium and large size, are majority of color right now. I want to congratulate you on inviting Cristina Jimenez here. Her predecessor, Sylvia Campos, was a student at MIT, along with Jocelyn right here. And, they built a great movement from the ground up. 80% of our cities are majority of color today, Black, Latino, Asian. If you add young white urbanites who voted for Obama twice at 80% or higher, I call those young white urbanites a new ethnic group. And I mean it. We use the term white like it's generic. These are people who consciously decide to live in diverse communities, who vote 80%, progressive regularly, which is very different from the rest of white America. They are a different group here. And for the first time in American history, we can see a majority coalition of people of color and white folks united. For the first time. Now, the Civil War, we had that briefly for a minute, but it was a war. And not since the Civil Rights Acts passed in 1964 have we seen a majority of white Americans vote for a Democrat for president. And Lyndon Johnson said, when the Civil Rights Act passed, realize that we're going to lose white America for generations. He said that, and he was right. We have never had majority of white folks vote for a Democrat for president since the Civil Rights Act passed. But now we're seeing in cities the emergence of a new phenomenon that's growing. And that is the coalition that elected Bill de Blasio twice. That coalition can sweep America, and will. And that coalition is what is actually going to defeat the fiscal austerity and conservatism and all of that stuff we see now. And that force is growing. What we have to do in New York and other places is show what a difference it can make when people come together, how we can actually make a difference in people's lives in a good way. That's our challenge. But change is coming. Now, inequality and fiscal austerity are self-imposed evils. Self-imposed. We are not a poor country. I think household wealth hit 100 trillion last year, which is the wealthiest we've ever been as a nation. We don't distribute equally, or even equitably, or fairly. And so that wealth is just being absorbed at the top, and it creates all kinds of problems. But it's a self-imposed evil. The Oakland Warriors could have lost to Cleveland if they had all acted as individual players and not shared the ball and so forth. But they acted as a team, even though they have a bunch of all-stars, and so they won. But they could have lost. If they had lost, though, it would have been a self-imposed problem. That's our problem. It's self-imposed. We don't work together. Now, I'm not afraid of fiscal austerity and inequality. I don't think we should be. There are paper tigers. I worked in Haiti where austerity is not a self-imposed evil. There are just lack of resources. Here, that's not our problem. We can defeat austerity and inequality with a compelling vision of the future. A compelling vision will inspire people who have given up on the political process to get engaged and vote. And that will change power dynamics. Couple things I want to say. We need to reconnect humanities with policy and politics. And by that I mean narrow issue advocacy is disempowering. And we academics have actually cultivated that, because when you study something, you try and narrow down your issue, and then you try and narrow it down to measurable outcomes, and then foundations do the same things, and you try and force everybody into deep silos. But from the standpoint of politics, that is disempowering. When everyone is just out there advocating for their own issue narrowly, it breeds lack of collaboration, lack of cooperation. Housing advocates cannot win by themselves. Gay and lesbian advocates cannot win by themselves. Labor advocates cannot win by themselves. Black, Latinos, Asians cannot win by themselves. Women cannot win by themselves. Environmentalists cannot win by themselves. Immigrant advocates cannot win by themselves. None of us can win by ourselves. If that's the case, then what we need more than saying my issue is more important than your issue, what we need more than that is understanding I don't win unless you win. And if you lose, I lose. So the most important thing is we learn actually how to support one another. That is more important than particular issue advocacy. We learn how to support one another across race lines, across gender lines, across sexuality lines, across these various lines. That is a specialty of the humanities. We need to bring that in to our thinking about policy and politics. Yes, we do need to deal with austerity in the immediate future, but we cannot afford to get trapped by it. The greater poverty is the need for new ideas and new policy directions in line with our environmental challenges, in line with sweeping technological change, and in line with the political possibilities of the moment. And that is what I hope you all can help us create for the future. Thank you.
Our next presentation, you see already queued up on the screens behind me. It's from Jim Malatras, the president of the Rockefeller Institute at Suny, Albany, who, in addition to his academic role, has also had very recent experience as a policy actor directly on the governor's team, I believe most recently as director of state operations, and so was intimately involved in one of the signature projects that he'll be discussing. For many is College Out of Reach, exploring scalable, innovative state programs to close the college access and success gap. Jim.
Well, I must have done something wrong, maybe because I am a part of the National Academy, but I have not gotten sworn in yet, so I get the pre-lunch presentation. So I beg your indulgence, and if you're hangry, we'll get you a Snickers bar or something, so don't be so tough on me. I want to thank Brooke College and the Academy for inviting me. I think there's nothing more pressing. We could go, I love the previous presentation on state and local control. I was in the state. I believe in lots of state control, and so we can get into that too. But a singular issue is trying to close the college access, and I like to say, and success gap. And I always this conference is very important. It's a way to level set as a society what we're thinking about and what we're doing to close equity gaps across the board. And I always go back to Martin Luther King's speech when he received his Nobel Peace Prize. And it really sums up the essence of America in one quote, right? The constant pursuit of equality and opportunity. And these are things that we still are striving for every day. I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity and equality and freedom for their spirits. So those are things that we're constantly striving for as policymakers and as academics and researchers. And I want to go to a more famous quote. The president of this fine institution, and the way that happens, the engine that makes that happen, are the public higher education institutions. I'm going to focus primarily on public higher education because that's where we can do it on a massive scale. This is not a zero-sum game. I'm talking about higher education, but really public higher education today. And to start with the positives, higher education does equal economic mobility, economic and social mobility. We have all seen this chart a million times. The Equality and Opportunity Project, the Chetty Report. He's famous now, you can just call him Chetty and everybody knows who he is, Raj Chetty. If you go from the bottom economic and socioeconomic rung in society, you go to a public higher education institution, you have more chance at social mobility and economic mobility, and this chart sums it up. Where you're sitting today is one of those institutions. If you get a degree at this school, you have a far greater likelihood of moving up the economic and socioeconomic rung than if you did not. And that is a testament to what public higher education is doing. Suny, the entire CUNY system fits that. There's many schools in the Suny system, the state university, and versus the national average, they're far exceeding this age. Talking about federal and state balance, it really is something, education at least, has been historically a state and local issue, right? It wasn't until recently that the federal government has gotten involved, and this was the former governor of New York, also known as the Secretary of State under Lincoln, that the standard of education ought to be elevated. Education is the chief of our responsibilities. So it is a public function that we do that. And many states, and I'm going to focus on New York and Tennessee because I figured I needed a nice southern state, but New York because I'm a New Yorker and we have a little arrogance about us, so we like to talk about ourselves, so we're going to talk about ourselves a little bit. But just look at what infrastructure is put in place by government now for public higher education. The State University of New York system has 64 campuses, more than 400,000 students, 35,000 plus faculty. The City University, the largest urban public university in the nation, in the world, 270,000 plus 25 campuses. The CUNY system was a testament of the great progressive movement here in New York City. And to the credit, it's not just because my institute is named after him, and I have to be nice to the Rockefellers, but there is a bipartisan tradition in New York where Governor Rockefeller built the Suny system, public higher education system, to give every kid an opportunity. But I want to focus first. Some of you have watched Anchorman, very good. It's the young kids at the all right, we got the young crowd, like me. I watched Anchorman last night. It was the way I release and relax. First, the bad news, not to be a Debbie Downer before lunch and the guy who comes in and does the buzzkill, but it's important to put this equity problem into context of our current social and economic challenges. First, you don't have to read the newspapers or see it on the streets. There's academic studies and books written about the growing income inequality and growing equity gaps in our society. And if you're going to tie it back to Martin Luther King, you have to live up to his words of trying to give equality of opportunity. And even in public higher education, you see a widening gap. This is a terrible chart if you're talking about public higher education. If you're the wealthy 25% quartile, you are going to go to college and you're likely going to graduate with a degree. If you're in the bottom rung, only about a third, less than a third, are going to go to college, and even less than that are going to graduate. That is a chart that we have to try to change the trajectory on if we're going to improve our economic and socioeconomic status of opportunity in this country. More bad news, because I am the bringer of bad news, but I have solutions, hopefully, that you will all poke holes in. We're also living in the shadow of the Great Recession. States made enormous cuts to higher education. No, I don't think one state did not make a cut, right? Every state had to make a cut. Even with federal money coming in, it wasn't enough. We're still trying to dig ourselves out of that situation. I'm going to get to, I don't think it's ever going to be back to where we were, at least for pure state aid or block aid. And then the economic conditions in state and local governments are kind of worsening right now. This is the first time we follow economics and state and local government finance at the Rockefeller Institute for 40 years. This is the first time 11 states have had late budgets, not because of politics. If you go to New York, we pass late budgets because they can't get along. There were literally budget gaps that they didn't know how to fill. They had enough revenue, so they had to figure out in the middle of the year how to make budget cuts. You're seeing this over and over again. The federal tax law is helping some states, but hurting some states. If you're in New York, we're a donor state, right? If you're playing the balance of the Senator Moynihan's famous balance of payments studies, we give more than we get. This is all what states are dealing with now while trying to underwrite and fund some of our social needs. The threat of budget cuts are real. In higher education alone, the president's proposed budget would have cut $200 billion over 10 years from higher education, freezing Pell, getting rid of work study, things like that. And what that does is, not right or wrong, it puts additional stresses on local and state governments to figure out what's going on. Even though the Congress basically restored everything, states get a feeling from the federal government. How do you feel about each other in an intergovernmental capacity, right? We've surveyed states now, those square states in the middle of the country, which are a little different than the coasts, but everybody's saying sort of the same thing. They feel like we're under constant assault. We don't know what's going on. We don't know how to budget in the future, where there could be potential budget cuts or changes. Laws are changing. So how do we adapt and grow in that environment? And as one person in state government, in New York state government recently told me, basically how they feel is you're on your own, right? It's up to states then to figure this out. This goes back to the question of we have a tradition of strong federal intervention into states, especially on civil rights and other things. I think education is a civil rights issue. But the progressive tradition largely has been a states' rights tradition. Brandeis was the laboratory of democracies, right? It's got to flip with civil rights. So there is an opportunity in all of this crisis, even so. But we have a lot of work to do. Because of the Great Recession and other areas, and while we need to get more kids educated, more students educated, more adults educated, here is the current picture of higher education. Over the last 10 years, 9 years or so, state aid has been cut 11%. Tuition increases have gone up 37%. Student loan debt has gone up 117%. So really what you've seen was a switch to the student bearing more of the burden and cost of higher education because of times of scarcity. Now, this is where I get myself into trouble sometimes, because people say, well, that's not 117% student loan debt doesn't account for everybody. That's true. Student loan debt is not evenly distributed. In public higher education, about 50% of kids at Suny and CUNY go to school debt-free now, right? So it's not proportional, but it's still problematic. And if you just look at the burden of student loan debt coming out, that is the greatest burden that most individuals face coming out. Not credit card debt, not auto loan debt, not housing debt, not mortgage debt. Literally paying for the cost of an opportunity to have a job and a career in life is the thing that is saddling people in the future. Let me give you some more bad news, and then we'll turn it around, I promise. That is starting to be reflected in how people feel about college, quite frankly. Enrollment, now, these are supposed to be inverse, but it looks more dramatic this way, so it's actually put together wrong, but still. You have seen a steady decline in enrollment in higher education over the last 30, 40 years. It's been slowly declining, and it's now elevating, it's now speeding up more rapidly. And there's some reasons for that. We are still a challenge. This is the success gap. Even if we get students in the door, we're not actually having people complete with a degree, which is part of the mission. And I'm not talking about a doctoral degree or a bachelor's degree, even certifications, which are important in getting people. The biggest concern, though, is all of this is running into a more powerful force, which is the growing confidence gap in public higher education. You may have talked about this before. This NBC News poll it captures the problem that we have right now. It's split about 50-50 in the country whether college is even worth it, period. which is a striking thing. It almost becomes an existential crisis for what you are doing and why you're doing it. I come from higher education. I am a product of higher education, public education. I come from the Suny system. I love the CUNY system. I got my career start because of it. But at the same time, where someone like me got an opportunity, and I didn't know anybody to get into politics. I didn't know the governor. I didn't know anybody. I just worked my way up. Now people are questioning it. And the worst part, the people who need the degrees the most are the ones questioning the system entirely. People who are going to college, who have the wealth, who have opportunities, they're saying, yeah, that's great. Working class families, middle class families, white families who actually don't have the degrees and need it in this transitional economy that I'm going to talk about in a second, are the ones saying, we don't trust it. We don't think it's important, it's something, which is only going to drive our economic and social inequities even further apart, right? That chart I showed you on this current trajectory will grow and grow and grow and grow. But, like I said, this is now actually the time we need a more highly educated society. While people are questioning what we're doing, this is the time we need to get more people into programs. Stat number 1. This is from The Economist. This is a global stat, but it applies equally to America. Nearly half of our jobs are at risk for automation. Those are decent wage sector jobs that don't require a lot of education. They're going away. They're going away quickly. If you look at projected job growth, it's jobs with sectors that require some version of post-secondary degree education. This is projected from 2016 to 2026. Yes, there's some growth in the job sector, the job market, where it's high school or less. The greater growth is with jobs that require some post-secondary education. The real issue is even that blue bar, the high school or less, those are jobs that people don't want now anyway. The wages are too low, it can't sustain a family, so people aren't even going to those jobs, even if we are creating them. By 2020, 65% of all jobs in this country will require some post-secondary education. We currently have 6 million unfilled jobs in this country right now. We don't have an unemployment crisis, we have an educational crisis is what we have. About half of those jobs, in all honesty, are jobs that are low wages, service economy jobs that we have trouble filling. We often import people from other nations, we don't want to talk about immigration today, to fill those jobs because they are low wages. The other half are sectors where we're actually importing people who are engineers and other things because we can't actually meet the job demands that we have now. So is college worth it? Yes. The data says college is worth it. They say college is worth it. The question is now, how do we incentivize the process of investing in it and getting people to go? So I have a little bit of a roadmap. It's a lengthy 65-point plan. No, it's kidding. I'm kidding. It's 5. If you're bored enough with this and you want to bore yourself some more, I left some copies of what we think the blueprint could look like for you, and I would, of course, be open to any suggestions afterwards. The key then, if we've had disinvestment from state and local officials, is how to get policymakers to actually invest in higher education. It's really the show me the money moment, and it really is at a critical time. But while we're often screaming, show me the money, show me the money, show me the money to policymakers, this is what they actually hear. We're not translating what we're saying to our folks in the policymaking community. Well, you are the Charlie Brown in higher education, the parents, or we're the parents going wah, 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 and the policymakers standing there, they're hearing you, but they're not listening. The first thing we have to get out of our minds, I think, is that somehow we're going to just get straight up aid back to our colleges and universities to pre-recession levels. I don't think it's going to happen. Not in this economy, not with this competition. I think the fiscal capacity is not there, and I think the political capacity and the political opportunity has changed. Many states, for better or worse, and this even started with the federal government, which I'll mention in a second, are simply not cutting blank checks anymore. Scarcity in resources, where do you put your economic incentives, where do you put your state spending? People aren't just doing block grant-like funding, and higher education is one of those areas where they're not simply just giving institutions blank checks anymore. That has been a bipartisan start that came from the federal government largely. That was the Bush administration, especially in education, No Child Left Behind and other things, right? How do you incentivize the change behavior? That was also the Obama administration with Race to the Top. So it crosses party and political divisions. It's more of an institutional approach from the federal and now state governments. So let's look at two models that I think have worked and have gotten states to invest and have changed the course and trajectory of students' success and can work and possibly be replicated in other areas. The first is Tennessee. First is New York, and that's the seal of Tennessee. And I want to compare the two a little bit. First thing that both of these states have done is while they have given more money in just sort of straight appropriation aid, they've invested directly in programs that affect students, giving money to the students as opposed to the institution, where I think is where more states are going to go now. We can get into the politics of why that is. The politicians like to give checks to people, not to faceless institutions. To me, money is money. So however you get them to invest, you get them to invest. And history really can serve as a guide. The GI Bill really, on some level, brilliantly allowed for mass education of society and crossing socioeconomic boundaries, racial divides. It really did broaden the scope. And largely what it was in the educational component was to give grants right to that GI and say, you go make your choices and what you want to do, and you figure it out, as opposed to the system sort of dictating it. So there are models that states are using. In many cases, the model has been like the GI Bill. One model and two programs has been the free tuition movement. And we can talk about the politics of the free tuition movement, but I want to go through some of the issues, and this is where states are going. The free tuition movement has had a long history, by the way. We're sitting in an institution at one point. It was tuition free. College was free in the CUNY system. Kalamazoo Promise, right? There have been small programs across the country for many years offering it in a boutique way. New York and Tennessee, Oregon's also a state now doing it, has done it on a scale, though, that I think can be measured and be looked at and replicated, because New York has 19 million people, millions of students. Tennessee is a large state also, not as large, and they have set up a course of actually making it replicable and sustainable. The first main element is, how do you bend the cost curve in education? And that, if you look at my previous chart where tuition was driving the investment in higher education, more costs were being borne by the students. So how do you release the release valve to that student to lower their overall burden? If you just take the Excelsior Scholarship, both of these are last dollar scholarships, which I'll get into in a second, but it's free tuition in New York at any 4-year school or any 2-year program. It doesn't matter, so any of those campuses that I showed. And in Tennessee, it applies to community colleges and 4-year schools if you're attending a 2-year program. But here's the New York example. The average cost of going to school for 4 years now, room and board, it would be about $90,000, $91,000 without the Excelsior Scholarship. If you actually qualify for the Excelsior Scholarship, you see about a 30% reduction in your overall cost. So it goes from $90,000 a year to $64,000 a year. The interesting thing about this is the average student loan debt in New York State now is about what? $26,000. So it shuts down the gap between what students are on average taking on for student loan debt and the actual cost of college. If you are a resident and you're actually commuting to a community college, in both states it's basically free, right? The difference with the programs are, in New York, there's an income threshold. It eventually will be where students can go tuition-free if families make $125,000 or less. There is no income threshold in Tennessee. There are residency requirements and all those other things. But this is what they've seen in Tennessee, who has been around a little bit longer. Tennessee is promising because it's been around since 2014, largely before the tuition sort of craze happened. The tuition-free movement really started with the 2016 presidential election, which we can talk about why that has set back the tuition movement a little bit. It's been good and fairly stable, which is why I like their program, because there's been Democratic administration and now a Republican administration. They both kept and have expanded the program. So it shows stability and it crosses politics and everything. In Tennessee, 17% less reliance on student loans of their student body. There's less of an uptake of people even filling out applications to get a student loan in Tennessee. What's good for the systems? In Tennessee, each year there's about 16,000 more students into the system. And in New York, so far in the first year, 23,000 more students in the system. Enrollment has been declining. What keeps our institutions floating is getting people to sit in the seats. And if they're not sitting in the seats, they don't have enrollment. FAFSA, this is the application for grants and things that you have to fill out. This is the biggest thing that these programs do as a last dollar program. The student can't get any access to free tuition until they fill out the FAFSA form and they exhaust every other source. The interesting thing is students have been leaving money on the table for decades. In Tennessee, before the free tuition, the Tennessee Promise was even put into place, only 60% of students actually filled out a FAFSA form, which is crazy. Why are you leaving money on the table? Now, nearly 80% of the students fill out a FAFSA form in the state of Tennessee. They're getting money that they're owed. That's helped drive change in behavior. The best part, because we're talking about closing, about more equality and closing equity gaps, we don't have the data in New York yet, but in Tennessee, you've seen greater diversity in the student body across the state. There are more Hispanics going to community colleges in Tennessee right now, and there are more African Americans going to community colleges. So we've opened up access points for students who weren't contemplating on going and diversifying our student body population as well. There are risks, of course, to a last dollar program. That means you have to use up everything else. Say the federal government does cut Pell. That puts all of the financial responsibility then largely on the states to cover these costs, right? In New York, the total cost when this program's fully phased in is about $130 million a year, additional money. In Tennessee, they set aside about $400 million in a trust. If you take away some of those programs that you rely on for a last dollar program, you could bankrupt these programs pretty quickly. I don't know how Tennessee and New York floats a program if there are not other federal sources of money available. So there are some risks. The second part to this is we still have to focus on providing greater support and enhanced support to at-risk students. This has become a zero-sum game in the free tuition movement, which I think is a false sort of choice and false narrative, right? There's been people in the free tuition movement saying, well, we have to focus only on the at-risk students. Why are you focusing on expanding education for all? I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they work hand in glove, and I want to show you how both Tennessee and New York are approaching it. I think what you might need to do is more integration of programs in order to make it work better. On some level, Tennessee, not so much, they're in the middle of the pack, but New York already provides on the top level of the most need-based tuition and grants to an aid to students already in the country. We're fourth in the nation. But there are other things that we can do. For instance, we have a TAP program, which is $1 billion that go directly to student grants, grants for college and other things up to families making $75,000. So we have a lot of robust programs already. But while you're expanding access to everybody, you do have to focus on those at-risk students because those are going to drive the economic and social mobility. In New York, free tuition went along with a more than 60% increase in our opportunity programs. We don't talk about it a lot, and maybe that's a mistake, but there's programs like EOP, Educational Opportunity Program, and SEEK in the state that provides additional supports, textbook aids, tutoring, mentoring. As we've done tuition, we've also had to link up and increase the funding for those programs, and we've done it about 60% more since 2012. We've tried to lower other costs in places too. We did a textbook program here, $8 million to try to lower the cost of textbooks. Tennessee has a fabulous mentoring program that starts in high school, which I think is really important. How do you get those kids, right? If you're a high school student in Chattanooga, and you say, here, now you go to college and figure it out. It's hard for many of those students to figure out what the heck they're going to do, what degrees. I don't know what a computer information system is. Why do I get into an associate's degree versus bachelor's degree? That's a key part. And then one thing that New York could do more of, which we haven't figured out because cost is still an issue, the CUNY ASAP program is one of the best programs in the nation, bar none, period, put it down. Those students who get into those programs are excelling in college, in career, because of those additional enhancements. There are other things, too, that the states are doing that they don't talk about much. We have a community schools program in New York State for community colleges. That provides wraparound health services and other needs. So, right, we're lowering and providing services to kids, even if they're getting into college. We're expanding access. You also want to expand the ability for them to succeed while they're in the programs. It's no good to them if they can't actually get health insurance or get vision taken care of if they're actually just in a college program. We have the No Student Goes Hungry program in the state too, food pantries and other things to lower the overall food costs. So there's more there. But those supports are an important component of this. Why states like this is that, again, you're investing in programs, right? A state will invest in something that they know, a housing program, a food program, a wraparound service program, even the educational opportunity programs. It's tangible, it's feel, it's not just a grant, a direct block grant to folks. And then finally, you can't forget about states when they're trying to replicate these things in this environment, can't forget about the students who've already graduated. This, in New York, is another key thing. We have the Get On Your Feet loan forgiveness program. Does anybody have any idea what this program is? No, it's the craziest. You do. Thank you, one person. The state of New York built off of President Obama's program, Pay As You Earn program. In the state of New York, if you make less than $50,000 a year, the state of New York will pay your total student loan cost for 2 years. Nobody knows about it. Part of the issue is, okay, back to direct state aid to the student, grants to the student. It doesn't make any sense for a student to graduate, then come out of college, and then take on all sorts of new debt, credit card debt, which is usually higher interest rates because they can't pay off their student loans. It seems anathema to the whole concept of public education. So all of this works together, these at-risk students with these tuition programs. Hopefully this will be no need for this after the tuition programs are more fully up and running. But the state of New York will pay your full student loan cost for 2 years if you make less than $50,000. Point number 3 is you have to break down traditional education structures and open up new access points. We are in the social media age. We have news cycles that last 5.5 minutes, no longer 24 hours. It used to be a week. We have people who, when they think of one-stop shop, they go into their iPhone and they literally do everything, right? So this sort of crazy maze that we have in higher education and in governmental programs have to be more integrated. And one of the best models where other states are now taking on to that is the early college, high school P-TECH movement. And those are ones that has really broken down barriers and provided the key. You get a high school diploma, you're a high school student who gets a high school diploma, and you give at-risk students free associate's degree while you're doing it, enhanced training and advanced job training, and by the way, a first-in-line job opportunity with any partnership on the outside. So P-TECH is the IBM version of the early college, high school. There's a pipeline right away. What's great for the student is if you're in the Bronx, one of the most successful P-TECHs we have is in the Bronx, President Obama went to it, is you don't have to take the guesswork. Where do you go next? What is the degree program? You get mentoring and an actual college education within a high school program. It doesn't matter to that kid in the Bronx whether you're sitting in a community college or in your high school program, you're getting the same degree. And by the way, you're also linking up to a job. The other part about this is replicable. You can replicate this. We have about 39 of these schools, not just P-TECHs, early college, high schools for all sorts of different programs. And eventually will serve more than 10,000 kids. Other states are starting to catch on to this. States will invest in this, especially as a match. This gets how do you close an equity gap? You have to get the external stakeholders involved, businesses and not-for-profits to participate. That helps generate some activity and investment from the outside community and helps actually link these kids to something. And I love this stat. If you look at the latest graduates, the cohort at the Bronx P-TECH school, the citywide community college graduation rate is in the single digits. It's not to blame, it's not to cast aspersions, it just happens to be a fact. In the P-TECH program in Brooklyn, they graduate more than 53% of their class with an associate's degree with a high school degree. They're 5 times what we're doing right now in our system. So why not break down some of these walls where college and high school don't have to be separate bodies, right? They can be one thing. It doesn't matter to the student. The student doesn't understand that they're stepping out of a high school and walking to a college and it's totally different, right? The Department of Education versus the City University of New York. They don't care. And by the way, they shouldn't care. It's how they can get educated. Finally, I've been talking about this, and it goes into the P-TECH model. It's not just about access, it's also about success. So thank you for a little bit of your time, and I'll take some questions.